Hello, today we're going to talk about conflict. Conflict is an inevitable, natural part of every relationship, whether it be a romantic relationship, a familial relationship, or a relationship at work. Conflict is often presented as though it's a negative thing, but actually conflict can be very positive. In fact, through conflict, change occurs, and change cannot occur without conflict. Often when we talk about conflict, we talk about it in terms of fighting and yelling, but really conflict occurs anytime that there's a disagreement, a difference of opinion, or an opportunity to express need for limited resources. So conflict is not a bad thing. Conflict, in fact, can only be handled bad. But conflict can also be handled well. And if conflict is handled well, then the relationship will always be improved. Again, despite that context, work or at home, the relationship will be improved if conflict is handled well. Now, people naturally, just as naturally as they are left-handed and right-handed, have different orientations towards conflict. This orientation has a lot to do with their own personality, but is also shaped by their environment and how they grew up, what they saw surrounding conflict. There are three orientations. The first is lose-lose. If you have a lose-lose conflict orientation, then you believe that when conflict is entered, it is a fight, and both people lose. It doesn't matter if someone actually gets what they want at the end. The amount of emotional damage and hurt feelings that is left over in wake of conflict makes it a losing scenario for everybody involved. The next type of orientation is a win-lose. Win-lose orientations are held by people who see conflict as a true competition, in which one person's going to come out on top getting what they wanted and the other person is going to lose. Then there are people with win-win orientations. These people naturally see conflict as an opportunity to improve the current status quo. By people expressing their true feelings and true opinions, one, they can alleviate some of their own discomfort and find a place to be more comfortable in their own world. Additionally, the insight that they give to the person who they're having conflict with could also help that other person improve their own person, their own surroundings. So as long as conflict is handled tactfully and constructively, everybody's going to win because everybody will walk away a better person. Even if feelings are slightly hurt for a little while, the benefit overall will make it worthwhile. Along with your orientation to conflict, you also very naturally have a response to conflict. Again, these are largely shaped by your environmental factors, how you grew up, how you saw conflict handled, and how it made you felt. The first response is exit. If you have an exit response to conflict, then that means anytime you see a fight coming on, you go away. You don't want to deal with it, you try to leave the room, you stop listening, you psychologically shut down. That is a 100% exit response. The second response is neglect response. This is where you don't run from it. You don't actually go away. You're just going to ignore it. Because if you ignore it, exist within it, but just act like it's not there long enough, eventually it will go away. Next is a loyalty response. A loyalty response in conflict means that you stand beside a principle, an ideal, or a person regardless of the actual issue. The best scenario that I can use to describe loyalty, because it's one of the more abstract ones, is the case of divorce. You've heard of proverbially people split their friends in a divorce. You know, her friend, she gets these people in the divorce, he gets these people. Well, that's a loyalty response. If you stand beside someone because of who they are rather than what you agree or disagree with in their actions or behaviors, well, that's a loyalty response. Okay? You can do the same thing with an ideal rather than a person. For example, if you take the side of a particular political stance or religion over and over, even if you might not totally agree with it, but still that is your stance and that's what you're going to fight for, that is a loyalty response. And last is a voice response. A voice response, again, can be handled very well or very poorly, but it is the response that people have that when something's on their mind, when there's a conflict, when something needs to be said, they're going to say it. As long as this is done tactfully, as long as this includes I language versus you language, where I language is, it bothers me when you leave your dirty socks on the floor, versus you language, which is, you are disgusting because you always leave your dirty socks on the floor. It's handled well. I language is very important for those voice responses because it puts the burden on me. Okay, you might be gross, but I'm the one who's bothered by this. This is my problem, that I am bothered and I need your help, versus it's all you and you are a problem and you need to fix yourself. So it's very, very important. Voice response is the healthiest of those responses because it's the only one that ever directly discusses the issue. And conflict can be overt and covert. The covert conflicts or scenarios are always addressed through exit and neglect responses. Voice responses are always overt. People always know what is happening and what the different perspectives are. An important thing to remember with conflict is that most of the time when conflict is engaged in, it's because people have misperceived the same communication scenario. They witnessed the same event, they listened to the same message, and yet they took away two different meanings from it. It's incredibly important to remember in the workplace. So again, voice response is a good thing. You want to air things out. You want to be direct. You want to make sure that the conflict is overcome because it can be a positive thing. But the way that you approach it is going to dictate whether or not it's a positive thing. Now, when you put together someone's response to conflict with their orientation, you get their conflict style. You should have received the link to the test of conflict styles. Your conflict styles are essentially, they can be viewed on an X and Y axis where you look at how assertive someone is and how cooperative someone is. And somewhere on that continuum, you're going to find how they rank as far as their conflict style. First, you have people who are not at all assertive. They're not going to stand up for what they believe. And people who aren't at all cooperative. They're also not going to be trying to figure out what you need either. These are called avoiders. They have an avoidance response to conflict. If they just pull away and stay away from it, they hope it will go away. Next, you have people who are highly assertive but low in cooperation. These are the competitors. These are the people who want to win the fight that they perceive to be the conflict. They always want to come out on top and get exactly what they want, despite the fact that there may be an alternative that gives both people what they need. It's more the challenge of the situation. You also have people who are low on assertiveness and high on cooperation. These are the people who are accommodators. Accommodators will just do whatever the other person needs to end the conflict. Now, what if you're in the middle of the road? What if you're somewhat assertive and somewhat cooperative? You need to express your ideas, but you also recognize that there can be a compromise here. If everybody gives and takes, we all get part of what you want. Well, that person is called a compromiser, and that is their conflict style. They look for a solution in which you can shuffle the deck. Everybody gets a bit of what they want, so no one's totally satisfied, but also no one's totally unsatisfied. Everybody wins a bit. The last possibility is that you're high in assertiveness and you're high in cooperation. So these are the things I need, and I definitely need them. But I'm also willing to try to think of an alternative in which I get everything I need, but you also get everything you need. These are the collaborators. These are the people who will come together during conflict to think of that third option that's not on the table yet that will address everybody's needs. So, naturally, we all have these responses, these orientations towards conflict that lead to how we handle it. We can all change our conflict styles because ideally we would all be collaborators. The best conflict resolution people are collaborators, and you can learn to collaborate, but it requires stopping and thinking through the moment. On your pathway to becoming a better conflict manager and to becoming a better collaborator, there are some things that you need to remember. First, during communication, because again, most conflict is caused by people having misperceived the same message. You always need to attend to the relationship level meaning and communicate supportively. When you're in a conflict with someone, what that means is that you need to remember what you know about that person. Okay? Was the message, did they miss nuances in the tone of voice? Are they the type of people that wouldn't pick up on that? Did they miss the sarcasm? Did they receive the message via email, whereas you received it via word of mouth, such that they were only dealing with 7% of the message? And also, what is their personality like? Our personalities influence how we receive messages. Our environments we grew up in influence how we receive messages, because that is our background that we weigh every message against. That experience of how we would have handled that message and what it would have meant beforehand. take those things into consideration and always ask yourself, if this is what's at stake, if this is what we're arguing about, what does that mean to the other person? And if you don't know, ask them. Next, make sure you listen mindfully. Listening mindfully is a difficult process because it means that you are listening so well that you can actually paraphrase the other person's argument. And that's important to do in conflict. Say, all right, just so I'm clear, what you meant here was. That way you make sure you're on the same perceptual lines. Listening mindfully involves a lot of attention. Your attention span is just like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the more endurance and the bigger it gets. So listening mindfully involves a lot of practice. And also take responsibility for your thoughts, feelings, and issues. This goes back to the I language versus you language. It makes me uncomfortable when this happens. It makes me uncomfortable when you do this. Take responsibility for how you feel. Don't use all you language like they're a bad person. People automatically get defensive when we use you language because they feel as though they're being attacked, whereas when we use I language, they take it to be, this is what's going on with me that you can help me with. Okay? Also look for points of mutual agreement. In conflict, always start off by identifying what you both want, what you both agree on, and try to broaden the conflict from there and looking for resolutions. Always look for ways to save the other space as well. And what I mean by that is, make sure that if you're going to engage in conflict with someone, you don't do it in front of an audience. Be as conscientious of the other person's needs, their desire to not be embarrassed. Keep conflict between just you and the person you're having conflict with. Because in the end, sometimes it might be you that was wrong because you actually misperceived the data and you would want them to do the same thing for you. And also, imagine how you'll feel in the future if you engage in conflict. We all feel better if something happens that upsets us. We all feel better addressing it immediately. And sometimes that means just emotionally exploding on someone or over a situation. Well, later on, once we have time to step back, perhaps the event didn't really merit that big of a reaction. So make sure you never deal with something when you're emotional. If you're in a situation where someone makes you mad in the moment and you can't step away, stop and take a couple of deep breaths. Deep breathing will actually reset the part of your lizard brain, the amygdala, that helps you perceive whether or not you're being threatened. Those deep breathing sends a message to your brain saying that actually everything's good. There is no threat right now. We don't need to engage in a fight or flight response. It's all good. Deep breathing is one of the keys, along with I language versus you language and perception checking, to really mastering conflict.